You've heard it said that the Greek is the original language of the New Testament. It's treated as unquestioned common knowledge, foundational even. It's the scholarly consensus. But is there actually any evidence to support this claim? Surely there is. Why else would the scholars reach such a consensus? When a belief is universally accepted as a fact, people stop looking for proof. You don't seek to prove what you already know is true. But if the evidence is not actually there, we shouldn't continue to believe the claim, right? When did the idea that the New Testament was originally written in Greek become accepted as an absolute fact? Shalom Aleichem, welcome to Try by the Fire with Yoshi, and I'm about to bring on the heat. The origin of this claim traces back to the year 1444, and a scholar named Lorenzo Valla. Valla conducted a word-by-word comparison between the official Latin Bible and ancient Greek manuscripts. He found numerous translation errors in the Latin text, proving the Latin Bible was completely dependent on a Greek predecessor. Because the Greek text was older and more accurate than the Latin, Valla made a massive leap of logic. He assumed the Greek was the absolute, objective, original language written by the apostles themselves. Valla's assumption became an unquestioned dogma in the 1500s because of one man, Desiderius Erasmus. In 1516, Erasmus used the newly invented printing press to publish the very first mass-printed edition of the Greek New Testament. He adopted Valla's leap of logic completely, championing the motu ad fontes, or back to the sources. To Erasmus, the Greek text was the absolute source. The timing of this print run changed history. It coincided exactly with the Protestant Reformation. Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and William Tyndale needed a baseline authority to challenge the Roman Catholic Pope and the Latin Vulgate. They seized upon Erasmus's printed Greek text, declaring it the pure, inspired, original tongue of God. This specific printed text became known as the Textus Receptus, or the received text. For the next 300 years, Western European Christians were taught that this printed Greek text was the direct, uncorrupted word of the apostles. But this conclusion that the New Testament was originally written in Greek was never an objective choice based on historical evidence. It was a political strategy. The Greek text was weaponized as a tool for a theological war in Western Europe by mass-producing the Greek text during a massive religious revolution. The Western Church locked Valla's localized 1444 assumption into a permanent, unquestioned dogma, completely freezing out the linguistic reality of the actual historical lands where the text was born. To find the actual linguistic reality, we have to leave Western Europe behind and look at the ground evidence in 1st century Judea and Mesopotamia. Mainstream Western academia claims that everyone in the ancient Middle East spoke Greek because of the dominance of the Roman Empire. They assume it was the mandatory language of daily life and commerce. Thus they conclude that the common Judean of the 1st century spoke and understood Greek. But historical evidence tells a different story. According to Roman imperial law, Rome operated under a legal policy known as per pacem societatis, or through a social pact. As recorded in the Roman legal text, the Institutes of Gaius, conquered populations who were not Roman citizens were legally classified as peregrini, or foreigners. Under Roman law, these provinces were legally protected to maintain their own local customary laws, traditions, and native languages. The Roman government never issued an empire-wide statute demanding linguistic assimilation. Roman governors only cared about two things: tax revenue and military security. They did not care what language you spoke to your children. Because of this, the primary historical records from the 1st century show the exact opposite of the Western narrative. the common people of Judea did not speak Greek. The language barrier between the local population and the Roman rulers was an immense wall. We understand this by looking at Flavius Josephus, the most famous first-century Jewish historian. He was a wealthy elite general and a priest, the top 1% of educated society. Yet, in Book 20, Chapter 11 of Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus flat out said that he could not pronounce Greek correctly because his culture actively discouraged learning foreign languages. He wrote that his nation did not encourage learning the languages of many nations because they looked upon this accomplishment as something common to servants. Moreover, in the opening preface of Book 1 of the Jewish War, Josephus explicitly states that he originally composed his historical account in his native tongue, which was Aramaic, for the people of the East, and only later decided to translate it into Greek using an assistant translator. If a top Jewish general and scholar could not master spoken Greek and needed a translator to translate his work to Greek, the common working-class people of Judea, like fishermen and carpenters, were certainly not fluent in it and certainly couldn't write it. The language barrier was so severe that during the Roman siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Roman military could not even talk to the citizens inside the city. Josephus records in Book 5, Chapter 9 of the Jewish War, that the Roman general Titus had to specifically send him to the city walls to translate the Roman surrender terms into their native language, Aramaic. The locals literally could not understand the Roman commanders. This severe language barrier is confirmed by actual Roman military practices and archaeological discoveries. The Roman army could not interact directly with the local populace. Imperial records show that the Roman legions had to draft local men into the auxiliary cohorts, force them to learn basic Greek or Latin military commands, and deploy them to act as structural interpreters between the officers and the native citizens. The absolute archaeological proof that daily life and law functioned entirely in Aramaic under Roman rule is in the Babatha archive. Discovered near the Dead Sea, this collection of 35 legal and personal documents belongs to a Jewish woman named Babatha, who lived in the early 2nd century. These documents, which include marriage contracts, land deeds, and property disputes, are written in Aramaic and Nabatean. Most importantly, the archive shows that when Babatha had to present her property cases before the Roman governor's court, her legal arguments had to be officially translated back into Aramaic because she did not speak or read a single word of Greek. This language barrier wasn't just confined to Judea. It existed across the entire Middle East. The foundational historical record of the Mesopotamian Church of the East, the Doctrine of Adai, confirms this exact same linguistic wall. The text records that King Abgar V of Edessa sent a royal political delegation westward into Roman-controlled Syria to meet with Sabinus, the Roman deputy. The text explicitly states that the king had to send a designated royal archivist named Hanan the scribe with the delegation. Hanan's specific job was to act as a professional interpreter and translator to bridge the linguistic gap between the Aramaic-speaking East and the Roman authorities. Even in the oldest historical records of the Church of the East, moving between the Roman world and the Semitic East required professional translators just to communicate. So why do Western scholars claim that the people of Judea spoke Greek if there is so much primary evidence showing they didn't? To support their narrative, mainstream academia relies almost entirely on ancient inscriptions. The most frequently cited statistic claims that 40% of the first-century Jewish burial boxes, or ossuaries, discovered around Jerusalem are inscribed in Greek. On paper, 40% sounds like half the population used the language, but when you look at the raw archaeological data, the math completely collapses. Out of roughly 1,000 total boxes discovered from that era, only about 200 have any writing on them at all. 40% of that tiny sample size is a grand total of only 80 boxes. Furthermore, calling these markings inscriptions is highly misleading. The vast majority are not sentences, letters, or complex thoughts. They are literally just a single word, a name, like scratching the word Simon or Mary onto the side of a stone box. To make matters worse, the text on several of those specific 80 boxes explicitly states that the deceased person was actually an immigrant from places like Alexandria, Egypt, or Cyrene, Libya, regions where Greek genuinely was the native tongue. They were foreign-born travelers buried in Israel, not local Judeans. So the actual reality is that archaeologists have found roughly 80 luxury stone boxes out of a city of tens of thousands of people, featuring nothing more than a single name scribbled in Greek letters, with many explicitly belonging to foreign immigrants. To take that microscopic data pool and extrapolate from it that the entire native nation of Judea could speak, write, and think fluently in the Greek language is completely ridiculous. The second piece of inscription evidence scholars cite is the famous temple warning inscription. Archaeologists discovered multiple stone tablets from the 1st century Jerusalem temple containing a strict legal decree written in Greek. The sign warned that any foreigner caught crossing into the inner sanctuary would be executed. Mainstream scholars argue that because the temple authorities put up massive public signs in Greek right in the heart of Jerusalem, the general Jewish population must have been fluent in the language. This argument is completely backward. The sign was explicitly addressed to foreign Gentiles and Roman soldiers who did not speak Aramaic. To use a warning sign specifically meant for foreigners to prove that the local citizens spoke Greek is entirely nonsensical. The third piece of inscription evidence scholars use involves ancient currency. Mainstream academics point to the coins minted in Judea by Herod the Great and the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, which feature Greek lettering rather than Hebrew or Aramaic. They argue that because everyday money used in daily commerce featured Greek, the common people must have known the language to buy and sell. This conclusion ignores basic imperial politics. This coinage was political propaganda forced upon the region by Rome. Standardizing currency in the language of the empire was an act of government administration, not a reflection of local speech. Just because a coin features the name of a Roman governor printed in Greek letters does not mean the local fish vendor or carpenter spoke the language to run their business. Beyond inscriptions, scholars rely on a heavily speculative argument involving ancient geography. They point out that Galilee sat directly on the Via Maris, the international coastal highway connecting Egypt to Syria. They argue that because Judea was a major trade route, the local population had to speak Greek to function in the marketplaces. This argument completely misunderstands how international commerce actually works. Doing business with a foreign merchant does not require eloquent or fluent language skills. In any global marketplace, a local vendor or carpenter only needs a few dozen nouns and numbers to bargain over prices. This is seen even today in various countries where the local populations do not speak English even though it's the so-called universal language. In countries like Japan, where they do not speak English, they use single words with a strong accent and hand gestures to attempt to communicate. English being a universal language does not just magically make them able to speak it. 2,000 years later, future scholars may look at Japan and think that because of the abundance of English writing and the fact that English is considered a universal language, that obviously the Japanese people spoke English. They would be completely wrong. It's simply a conclusion disconnected from reality. Human communication heavily relies on physical gestures and visual cues. People do business in foreign countries every single day without knowing the language of the person across from them. To take basic transactional market haggling and extrapolate from it that working-class Judeans could speak Greek and even write complex theological documents in fluent Greek is a massive leap of logic. Thank you everyone for joining me for part 1. Part 2 will be coming soon, and we'll be talking about the textual and manuscript evidence for the Aramaic versus the Greek. Shalom.